Welcome, everybody, to a special edition of All In with Art Stapleton, a New York Giants podcast brought to you by NorthJersey.com and The Record. I am your host, Art Stapleton, and the preseason is on tap tonight at MetLife Stadium, the New York Giants and the Detroit Lions. But this kind of feels like the undercard because the main event was two joint practices between the Giants and Lions, and I do use the boxing reference for a reason. But without further ado, I am going to bring someone in, our special guest today, who I've known for a long time, back when he formed the best backcourt in the Bergen Jamboree. That is none other than Jason McCourty. He and his twin brother Devin, before they were Super Bowl champions and NFL stars, they were St. Joe's Green Knights, and loved watching them play and that Bergen Jambo and everything else. But now with CBS Sports, Jason McCourty, NFL veteran, was there with me at Quest this week. So, J-Mac, welcome to the show. And what's up, dude?
Man, appreciate it. Talking about the good old days, high school basketball, out there winning championships alongside my brother. So we were just good athletes out there. We didn't do really anything other than that of playing great defense. But like you said, it was at Giants camp. I saw, I guess you can say, the highlights all over social media of practice number one, and was already planning on going on Tuesday. It was like, I really have to be there on that next practice, just seeing the way. And obviously, like, listen, I played in the league for 13 years. I took part in joint practices, and at some point, there's always going to be a scuffle at practice. And you know it, guys and girls that have gone to practice throughout the years, it's going to happen. At that level, that many of them doesn't always happen, but you saw there was some fines that came out after that. So that's not a typical joint practice, the way those two teams went at it.
You know, I said I put this out on social media yesterday when those fines came down, $200K for the Giants and the Lions. Now, you know the business of the NFL. You know, that's like walking in for Starbucks for the owner of the NFL. And I think, you know, John Mara and Steve Tisch and their families with the Giants ownership, if they could come out and get that kind of fight from this team this year after what happened early on last year, 40-0 in the opener. We all know everything that went wrong in the second year for Brian Daboll. I think they'd probably pay triple or quadruple that just to guarantee that this team showed some fight. Overall, for you, you're going to see the Giants. Now, I know you're with CBS Sports. Even though they're switching, AFC, NFC, you'll be covering the entire league. But you're in a booth with Andrew Catalan and Tiki Barber, so we'll get to that later. The idea of having two twins in the booth, which is great, and it's not your brother, but another set of twins. I think that's pretty cool. But overall for you going in, I know you had high hopes for the Lions because I saw you with Rich Eisen on his podcast. Take me through just the mentality of going out. You show up to see the Giants. What are you thinking in terms of what you're going to see from a Giants perspective going up against that Lions team?
Yeah, and obviously the preseason, you're working through some things and you're figuring some things out. But as you look at the New York Giants, and I watched the Hard Knocks the offseason, and you saw one of the major things was upgrading the offensive line. And I got a chance to go out to practice, and I got a chance to play alongside Jermaine Illuminor when he was with the New England Patriots. We were both there. So seeing his growth and seeing him out there on the practice field, not only as a guy that is going to go out there and compete and a talented player for them, but as you mentioned, the undercard and mentioned the fights taking place, like Jermaine was one of the main getting involved in that. And I think it's an attitude thing, especially for offensive lineman Greg Van Roten, him being signed there. Been around Greg over the course of my career a ton of times. John Ryan, you're bringing in not only more talent and guys that are veterans and understand how this thing works and the continuity that you have to have on the offensive line, but you're bringing guys in to set a tone and set an attitude. You mentioned ownership looking at this team and them having fight and going out there competing. Man, it starts up front. You already know on the defensive side of the ball, when you have a guy like Dexter Lawrence in the middle, he's going to set the tone. And then you bring Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeaux. You're now looking at your team and you're saying, you know what? Up front, we're walking in, we're getting off the bus, and we have guys that are ready to punch somebody in the mouth. And that sets a tone for the team. And you just mentioned training camp this year. Anybody that follows the NFL in any type of capacity, if you've looked at training camp this year, there's one name that continues to come up. Malik Nabers probably has the all-time best training camp highlight tape. It's like an and one mixtape if you go back over the years of what you can possibly do in training camp. So I think they're starting to feel like, and I got to imagine for Daboll, he's starting to feel like, all right, this is the type of attitude and team that I want to have. Because, you know, Daboll's a fiery guy, and he wants to be in the mix as well.
So let's talk, we'll get to Nabers, obviously, because I want to get your approach, your feelings on what you saw, because I know you look at it as a former player, so you can kind of bring that perspective in addition to, just being there involved. When you're, talking attitude, a team attitude, sometimes we talk culture, and some fans kind of roll their eyes and think it too much is talked about, a culture. Like, you win games, you'll create a culture. From your perspective, and you've run the gamut in the NFL. You were on a team that, did not do very well, and you were on a Super Bowl champion, and everywhere in between when you bounced around from, in your long career from Tennessee to Cleveland, then to New England, and then Miami. Did I have those four right? Is that off the top?
Right in order, too. That was excellent.
But, can too much be made of culture? Like, what does that mean in terms of, when you're on a team, do you get a sense, they always say players know when they see guys, but do you know when you're around a team? I mean, I know you don't want to admit when you're part of that culture that, this may be a rough road to go here, or we're special. I mean, take me inside that from a former player's perspective.
I do think sometimes there is too much made of culture and leadership from the outside looking in. Like, I know there were times where I was in Tennessee and you have different fans or reporters or whatever the case, media saying, like, this team lacks leadership. And sometimes people will look at leadership and you're like, all right, when they brought the team in the pregame, and who was standing in the middle and hooting and hollering and who's yelling at practice, and you're like, all right, this team has so many leaders on it. And then within a team, sometimes you have a guy talking all the time, and a lot of the guys within the locker room are just like, I wish this guy would shut up. Like, no one's listening to him when he stands up and talks. I think when you talk about leadership, when you talk about culture, a lot of the culture part is just we have to have talented players that we know we can go out there and win with. When you're on a team, when I got to New England, it was the first time in my career where you were on a team and the expectation for that team was we are competing for a Super Bowl. And the reason they believed they were competing for a Super Bowl because, for one, they looked at the talent around the room. And you're like, all right, well, our quarterback is a guy that can get us a championship in Tom Brady. All right, we have weapons on the outside, a guy like Gronkowski, a guy like Edelman, guys who have an attitude that know that they can go out there and compete at the highest level in this league. And then you have guys on the defensive side of the ball that are like, you know what, we're angry that we're not getting enough love because we feel like we're a large part in it. So I think that has to do with culture, where there was years in my career or whatever team I was on where you're looking at it and you're like, well, if we can win our division, and there's teams that are like, well, our division's taken care of. Like, we're trying to get to the conference championship game so we can get to the Super Bowl. So I think that's what culture is about, more than just us putting up sayings on a wall and different things like that. When you look at the New York Giants, as soon as Daboll got there, now you do take on the attitude of your head coach because you develop a way of doing things. And your coach is the one who sets the tone for that. And I think you look at this Giants team and who Daboll is as a person, and they're taking on his demeanor. And when you're looking at them and they're ready to fight and training camp, and just the way and the fiery way they approach things, I think that starts to set the tone. Is that culture? No, I think that's just how we go about doing things. Now, over time, when you go about doing things a certain way and then that's the results that you want, well, now there's more belief that continues to grow within the team. So I think that's kind of how you start it and how you continue to develop it. But you need to have good players. Like that's what it comes down to. You have good players that build chemistry with one another, that trust and love one another, and you're able to string wins together.
It's funny you say the good players, because I was writing this down the other day off of Nabers, the idea that, Nabers was probably the best player at his position at 2 joint practices. And that's saying a lot, because Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think, is outstanding. I mean, probably top 5 receiver in the league and maybe one of the most underrated and overlooked, but what Nabers did in joint practices. And then you look at Dexter Lawrence, arguably the best nose tackle in the league, and maybe there's not an argument. And then Brian Burns is outstanding for what he brings to the table. And then you have Andrew Thomas at left tackle, who by the time, 1 or 2 years from now, when Trent Williams is retired, maybe Andrew Thomas is the best left tackle in football. So as far as talent goes, did you notice that when you go to the Giants that you almost right off the bat, that there's a handful of 4 or 5 players that are elite players that kind of everybody gets in line and tries to follow, and then the team you're going against knows those guys are on the field. Their presence is felt.
Yeah, because you need those guys, and then you fill a roster with, you have guys like myself who played long time in NFL. Was I one of the best players at my position when I was playing? No, I was really good and a starter in this league, and you plug those guys alongside who understand their role. Some of those blue chip guys, like you said, they're huge difference makers. You said Malik Nabers. For Malik Nabers on the offensive side of the ball, yes, we're seeing him go up and make these outstanding catches and making plays all throughout practice. But what that also does is it elevates Daniel Jones as a quarterback as well, because now when he goes out there and you have a Malik Nabers that's dominating on the outside, the defense has to do something about it. So now when we go up there and line up, we're like, all right, well, we can't just put one guy on him, because whenever we go man-to-man and the quarterback sees that, he's just going to go to a mismatch that he feels he has out there. Well, now we have to put two guys over there. Well, now Malik Nabers is dictating defense. So now where for Daniel Jones, your reads might have been harder to figure out pre-snap and post-snap. Well, now right away when the ball hits your hands, you know exactly what the defense is doing, because now he is dictating what they have to do in the rotation they have to do on that side of the ball. You mentioned Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns. For an offensive line on every single play, I've been in those meetings and team meetings where a head coach is like, we have to block this guy on every freaking play. I don't care if we're double teaming him in the run game. Forget about the linebackers. Same thing goes for Burns on the outside. If you're having to chip him and do different things, that's going to help the secondary on the back end, where you have maybe a rookie and Drew Phillips playing in the slot and you're figuring out the cornerback slot opposite of Banks. You're trying to figure those things out. But Shane Bowen, the defensive coordinator, he knows he was in Tennessee, and he had Jeffrey Simmons on the inside right there. Howard Landry ended up getting hurt, but Arden Key went off and had a lot of plays. So when you have those guys, it helps dictate the rest of what you can do around those guys. I've heard a head coach call certain players erasers. And you're like, you get a certain guy on your team, and now he's an eraser of some of the deficiencies you have on the rest of your roster. I played with one of the greatest erasers ever when you talk about Tom Brady, and he can erase certain things. You talk about Tom's on the left tackle spot. He can erase maybe some other things, because you can say, you know what, you got your guy one-on-one, and we can help other people because of what your abilities are.
Let's talk the secondary a little bit. I don't know how much, those joint practices are weird, because you're trying to see so many different things. But from a Giants secondary perspective, I don't know how much you saw Tay Banks last year, but I think he had a solid year. He had his ups and downs, and he had, competition at that position. So he seems like a guy who can really step up and kind of become that, from solid to a good player that you're looking at. But then you kind of mix it and match it. When you're a part of a secondary, and you were probably, a lot of times being in that bank spot, the idea that you're a solid player, you're a very good player, people can count on you. How hard is it in this league? If you have those erasers, can you help the secondary on the back end, where the Giants do have some questions and trying to figure out, do they bring in a Stephon Gilmore or somebody who's a veteran who's done it in this league? Can you survive in this league with young players trying to figure it out? And I think that's probably a question that's been asked inside the Giants facility over the last couple months.
Yeah, I think you can. I think it's more about the combination of what you have on that back end when you're talking about secondary play. My third year in the league, our cornerbacks were myself, Cortland Finnegan, and Alteron Werner at that cornerback position. And I was in my third year. Werner was in his second year. Finnegan was a true vet at that point. So you can have a combination, and you got to know your guys. Like you mentioned, a guy like Banks as a guy that you saw the skill set early on. Is it going to be a perfect just ascension this way? No, as a cornerback in this league, especially if you're matching up against the best receiver week in and week out, there's going to be ups and downs. Guys are getting 15 targets a game, and you have to be perfect on every single target when you're going against some of the best guys in this league. It's not always going to be successful, but I think it's more about the combination you have when you bring these guys together, the attitudes. Sometimes it is nice to have a veteran in the room. One of probably the best secondary I played in was in New England, where we had Stephon Gilmore on one side, myself, we had John Jones, we had a young guy like J.C. Jackson who was still learning what the NFL was, but there wasn't too much asked of him, because it was just like, you have these guys around you that if you may not understand something, they can tell you exactly what to do. You just got to go out there and play football. But I'm not one of those guys that say, all right, we have to have a veteran here. If you have a young guy that can play some football, man, just go out there and play. You gain the experience when you go out there and you make plays. You don't have to have a veteran. You just have to have a guys in that secondary that can compete and that can cover. So you, like you just mentioned, Banks is a guy that is a good player that can be a really good player in this league. You got to have somebody on the other side as well, because at the cornerback position, no matter how good one guy is, and we feel like, hey, Darrelle Revis was with the New York Jets. We don't have to throw the ball to Revis' side. If the other guy on the side isn't Antonio Cromartie or somebody like that, we're in for a long day on defense. So you got to have a secondary where everybody plugs and plays and they can play as a unit and be able to go out there and dominate.
You mentioned Drew Phillips, so obviously you watched him a little bit. Or he was in the middle of several scuffles the other day. What did you know about Phillips? Is it just one of those things where you just picked his name up, or have you watched some of him?
Well, being at camp, and when you're going against, you mentioned Amon-Ra St. Brown, when you're in the slot, you're going against a guy of that caliber. If I'm the New York Giants and we have this young kid and we're drafting him and we think highly of him, a joint practice like that tells you what you need to know, because I think for those guys, when you're scouting a player and you're looking at them, the hardest part is trying to figure out how a guy competes. Does he love football? The intangible things that you can't watch, or you can't figure out when you're just watching film. Because when you're looking and you're evaluating this guy, all right, he ran a 40 in this, all right, he jumped this high, all right, when I turn the tape on, he opens up his hips good on this, he's good in press coverage. And you see some of those things, all right, we can develop those things. When you get out there in a joint practice against a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown who loves to mix it up, and you're right in the middle of that, and you're going toe-to-toe with him, and you're not backing down, as a coach, as a general manager, as somebody involved with the organization, you're like, all right, like we got something here. Do you know if the person's going to be an all-pro and all of those things? And no, you're still figuring that out. But you know you have a chance, because this guy loves to compete, and he loves football. And you saw that from him if you were out there watching their joint practices.
All right, let's talk your impressions of Nabers. We all know, he was the story. He's probably the story of all, training camp all-pro, the way everything is going out. What impressed you most about some of the things that you saw from Nabers on Tuesday?
His ability to go up and get the football. I think that is one of the hardest things as a cornerback. Is there's sometimes you're going to go against a great player and he's going to beat you. He's going to run a slant and he's going to get inside and you're going to make the tackle, but he just beat you on that route. The tough thing is when you felt like you had flawless technique on a rep and you're doing a one-on-one and whatever the case it is, and you look back for the ball and you're in perfect position and a guy just goes up and catches the ball. And being in Tennessee for so long, I had to go against Andre Johnson earlier in my career. Dre leaves, and then DeAndre Hopkins walks in the door. And those are guys, especially Hopkins, where wasn't the fastest guy, wasn't the quickest guy. And going up against him, I felt like every time the ball came his way, I was going to be in position to be able to make a play. The hardest thing with him was somehow or another, he was going to find a way to come down with the ball. And you saw the one against Terrion Arnold. He's in great position, and Nabers just goes up and makes the catch. And I think what's been, really impressive with him is how he runs his routes, and he runs them at every single level. You're seeing him make a catch at the intermediate route. You're seeing him make the catches down the field. I think that just gives him a weapon where it's just like when you're drawing up an offense, you're just like, all right, where are we putting Nabers? All right, this is a focal point. All right, we want him here. We want him at the point of attack. And that's a tough thing, because what I loved about the joint practices was you had Terrion Arnold, who I think is going to be a really good corner in this league, drafted out of Alabama. Then you had Carlton Davis, who comes over from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for the Lions, who played a ton of man-to-man in Tampa system with Jamel Dean and loves to be in bump and run and loves to compete. So when you're watching him go against guys like that, these are guys that are going to be asked to play a lot of man, and that's something in this league that you have to be able to hang your hat on. So as a receiver, you got to be able to beat man coverage, and you saw that from him.
I said something, you mentioned speed and just, guys might not be the fastest. Now, obviously, we know Nabers is fast. Yeah. But the interesting thing about him, and I kind of mentioned this the other day, he looks like he's always going at the same speed. And that kind of, draws a corner's eyes in, and it's almost a false sense of security from that perspective. You've seen that, I would imagine. What does that do to a corner when a guy can make everything look the same? It's almost like a pitcher who can make, his his curveball and his fastball look exactly the same coming out of his hand.
It just makes it extremely challenging. And as a corner, and we used to say, you'll have a guy that may be a burner, but it's just like when he's a track guy, and when he's running fast, you can see it right off his start, and you're like, all right, get my engines running. I got to get ready to roll. But you can see when a guy has to prepare to stop, was it sometimes the easiest thing as a corner, where it's just like, all right, he may be a burner, but I can tell when he's really taking off or when he's going to have to shut it down, because it may take him 5 steps to come out of his break. When you have a guy, and we talked about this already at the end of practice, where the other day Daniel Jones throws a double move where Malik Nabers breaks it out right around, it was a 3rd down play, right around the sticks, and then he turns it up. But for the DB, this looks exactly like the out route that he runs, that if I've been in training camp and I've been covering him, and then next thing you know, he takes off and he's able to put the burners on. That's so hard to cover, because you're looking at this thing and you're studying film all week long to get ready. And when every route looks the same, you don't have anything you can hang your hat on. And part of playing that DB position, yes, you need speed, you need intangibles, but a lot of it is anticipation. When I'm watching the guy so much, I can start to figure out his mannerism and his body movement when he's doing certain routes, and you can start to hang your hat on. There was a time where we were playing a game when I was in New England. I had figured out the slot receiver on his stems, what foot he had up to start to play, whether he was breaking a route on an over or whether he was going on an outside breaking route, and got an interception in that game. When you have guys that make everything look the same, that means I have to react to every single thing he does in his route. And as good as an athletic as some of these guys are, as a DB, when I'm only reacting and I can't get ahead of anything, it makes it extremely hard to win on the rep.
You've been involved in multiple different franchises. Obviously, your time in New England is what, people obviously remember. You go and you've got the GOAT at quarterback, the GOAT at head coach. It's funny that you get to the Giants and what Daboll's trying to build here. Give me a sense. It's funny when I brought up Nabers to Daboll, he just kind of backs off. They're all very hesitant, and understandably so, to give too much praise to a rookie this early in his career. But sometimes the toothpaste out of the tube. I mean, this is it. You can't control it, so you got to do what you can to manage it. From your perspective, you were there. I'm sure you bumped into guys. What's your sense in that building of what they have here in this kind of player, and also what the Giants have going into year 3 here with Daboll and Joe Shane kind of leading the way?
Yeah, I think for them, those guys eat, sleep, and breathe football. So you're watching every single player in the draft. You're watching all the guys that are across the league. So when they're watching a guy like Nabers, or anybody for that matter, how you mentioned Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, Andrew Thomas, when they're watching these guys, you can tell when a guy has an elite ability. I think the difference is for them, when you're watching Dexter Lawrence or Brian Burns or Andrew Thomas, you're watching it, but then you also can turn the film on from actual games, and you're like, all right, these guys have done it on a Sunday. I think to your point, when you're asking Daboll or Joe Shane or anybody about him, I would imagine they're like, man, this guy, we think he has a chance to be really good. But we can't say, all right, this guy is the guy, because he hasn't done it yet. So there's one thing to dominate in practice. There's another thing to transfer it over to the football field. He'll get his first chance against the Lions in a preseason game with the lights on, depending upon how much he plays and all of that. But that's a preseason game, and we'll say, you know what? If he goes out there and he dominates, man, he really looked good in the preseason. We'll see how it looks when the regular season gets there, or how preseason number 2 gets there. So there's always going to be those checkpoints that you have to have. And then if he goes out there as a rookie, and he could be rookie of the year and have a tremendous season, as we talk about Jamar Chase and Jefferson and Odell Beckham, all of these guys, and then it'll be like, well, can he do it in year 2? We saw it for one. So as a coach or somebody in the organization, you're always challenging a guy to continue to grow his game and continue to get better until ultimately you're putting on a gold jacket, and then it's just like, all right, you know what, your time is done. You can go ahead and smile and kick back. So I think they know what they probably have in the building, but it's always about challenging guys, because you can't be complacent. And for Daboll and Giants fans and everybody, you know how hard it is to win in this league. And it's not guaranteed just because you have a really good head coach or a really good general manager, or you paid a quarterback that is just going to ascend and you're going to win games. You have to go out there and you have to pay the price every single year.
I know Dev had more of a relationship with Daboll, but from your perspective, going into year 3, I don't know if you had a chance to get with him at all this week, but just the idea of what he's up against in year 3, knowing what happened at the end of year 2 and Wink Martindale leaving and all that stuff. Do you have a sense of where or what the league thinks of Brian Daboll right now? And does it make an impact when a guy like that, who's been such a good play caller in his career, taking back ownership of the offense and where he's at with this team going forward?
Yeah, I know for myself, and my brother got a chance to be in the same locker room with Dave's when he was in New England. I didn't get that chance. My interaction with Dave's had been more playing against him, and there was always a nightmare. I can remember specifically when he was in Buffalo. They're in the red zone, and they run a bubble. We're playing cover two, and they run a bubble screen to maybe John Brown opposite of me. And as I'm getting a thumbs up on the screen, opposite of me. And it was a throwback to the running back. And it was a play that no matter what defense we were in, there's no plan to defend that play. And for whatever reason, I felt it and was able to make the play. And it was one of those small plays within the game that if you're on the defense and you know the scheme, when we got back and we're watching film the next day, it was just like, that was a great play called by Daboll. And you're looking at it like that should have gotten us. And it was every time we played against him, there were going to be 3 plays like that within the game plan that no matter what it was, he designed something that was just better than whatever call that we were going to be in, because he anticipated what it was telling us, the probability that we were going to be in this call. He was going to draw something up that was perfect for it. So I think the league and guys that I can't talk about how the coaches or media people talk, I know from having to compete against this guy of how much of a challenge it was going to be when it came to whatever he was coming up with game plan wise. But I think overall, what have you done lately? That's the name of this league. It's a production league. No one cares what you did 2 years ago. No one cares what you did last year. So I think for those guys, their head is down and they're grinding. Wink Martindale, for them, that's all right. That was last year. Like, that's old news. Like, we have a new defensive coordinator. We have new players on defense. We have new guys on the offensive line. We're not worried about what was done a year ago. The main focus is how do we make this team good this year and go out there and put a product on the field that is going to go out there and win games.
Now, you're up there in Foxborough. You're getting ready, which is really a cool thing for the preseason, that both you and Devin are in the booth together calling Pats in the preseason, right? That's a cool opportunity.
Yeah, it's really cool. And last year we did kind of an alternate cast in my basement of the Patriots preseason games of hanging out, telling old stories. And this year, Devin, myself, and then Scott Zolak will be in the booth, and we'll be obviously talking about what's going on the field. We'll be talking about just the team in general, a lot of what's going on in the league, and just trying to mix it up in the preseason. And Bob Sosi has done games. He'll be on the radio, has been tremendous for the New England Patriots and calling games and his coverage of them as well. And then Brian Hoyer is a guy that's going to be in studio with Paul Perillo. And Hoyer is a guy that we want to hear from as well, because he's, like me, a guy that played a long time in the league and bounced around in different systems. And here with the New England Patriots, they drafted Drake May 3rd overall. And everybody wants to know about the development of the quarterback, much like every team. Daniel Jones is a guy that he came in, he was drafted, he developed, and you're sitting there for a long time. Giants fans like, we can't stand this guy. We want to get Daniel Jones out of there. Daboll comes in, he wins a playoff game on the road in Minnesota, and he plays well for that football team and earns his contract, and then he gets hurt the next year. And everybody's kind of like, well, we need to get rid of Daniel Jones. So there's always storylines, and especially at that quarterback position, where if you have one, you have a chance. And if you don't, you're still in search of one to even give yourself an opportunity to win games and say that we're actually competing to win a Super Bowl.
We know the Giants and Patriots are always going to be linked. You've got the 2 Super Bowls, Eli and Tom Brady, Belichick's love for the Giants, also being up in New England now. So I know it's always that interesting. And then you mentioned Hard Knocks earlier. Obviously, Hard Knocks kind of brought the Giants Patriots back full circle. The idea that, the Giants wanted Drake May. I mean, they were trying to get Elliott Wolf to move off of that number 3 spot, and they did not want to take it. And there were some reports in New England that because Brian Daboll was pushing so hard to get up to that spot, there was almost this feeling in New England like, we respect Daboll, we respect Daboll's love for quarterbacks. If he's pushing for this quarterback, why are we moving out of it? Let's just stay and take this quarterback. Now, again, that was third and second-hand information, but it's interesting now because Nabers has been a story in the summer, and the Giants ended up with Nabers. To me, it's interesting to see as this moves along here, because Giants fans, they're going to look at Drake May, and if he becomes an outstanding quarterback, that's going to be that situation where, did we get the right guy at Nabers? Should we have given more to get May? Your sense of what's going on with May now, and do you think there's any part of the New England fan base that, is looking at Drake May saying, what, did we get the right guy?
Oh, the fan base, of course, because the hardest thing with practices and training camp is unless you're on the staff and you're sitting down there and you're putting a practice plan together and you're Alex Van Pelt, the offensive coordinator here for the New England Patriots, and you're installing and you're looking at the development. When you watch practices, you don't know what the heck's going on. I played 13 years. I was at the Giants practice. People are like, hey, Daniel Jones, Drew Lock's looking better. I'm like, is he? Like, do you really know what's asked of a guy on a single play? When you're watching a game, it's a lot easier. You can clearly see the down and distance, the situations. When you're just watching practice, they could be working on red zone for Drake May up here. They could be working on red zone, and they're asking him, hey, on this play, like, we want you to take a chance in practice and try to make this read and make this throw. And the ball's intercepted. It's just like, well, see, his development is not where we expect it to be. And for Drake May, for these guys coming in from college, depending upon what you're asked to do, C.J. Stroud was in a little bit more of a pro-style offense when he had Ryan Day with Ohio State. So he comes in and he's calling plays. Talking to these guys now, like, you're in college and you look to the sideline, and I go to a lot of Rutgers game, obviously, as an alumni, and they have guys color of the rainbow in polo shirts, where it's green, orange, yellow, all on the sideline doing all these signals, holding up cards and everything. And the quarterback gets a call, he turns to the huddle, says one word, and you're running the play. And now you're in a system where you have these long, gigantic play calls, and you're trying to learn it all at once. And I think we want, as fans here in New England, they want to see Drake May in there competing with Jacoby Brissett right away and him winning the job and everybody saying how good he looks. In reality, Jacoby Brissett has been in this system with Van Pelt in Cleveland, so he walks in the door and he knows the system already. He can make the play calls and he understands it, so he should look better, and he's a veteran in this league. So I think the hardest thing with these quarterbacks is it's hard to say, hey, we want to be patient, because it's just like, well, we watched C.J. Stroud last year, and he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and probably the best rookie season we've seen a quarterback have. So it's just like, well, we want to replicate it. And I think you mentioned earlier for the Giants and then wanting Drake May. And I think when you looked at Hard Knocks, the one thing that was clear was they didn't really mention Caleb Williams, but they thought a lot of Jaden Daniels and they thought a lot of Drake May. And I think as an organization, you're always trying to upgrade your team and get the best players available. And I think they looked at those two guys as really good players, and if they had them, they could upgrade. I think what was really interesting, I remember talking to Peter Schrager about this, was there were 6 quarterbacks taken in the first round of the draft, and we heard them mention the guys at the top half. And Hard Knocks, you didn't hear them ever mention J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix, Bo Nix. And I think that had a lot to do with they like Daniel Jones, and they thought these other quarterbacks, they had a chance to be one of the greats. Maybe we take a chance and we move up to get them. But they never mentioned, as in, leading up to the draft, everything that was mentioned with J.J. McCarthy and being linked to the Giants, it didn't come up at all. So I think that was kind of a vote of confidence of Daniel Jones. It's like, yeah, we have to explore and look at some of these guys because we think they're really good players. But, like, that doesn't change the fact of what we think of you as our quarterback.
You mentioned, so one other thing I wanted to mention on that, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about your booth with Tiki, and then I'll let you go. You've been with me a lot longer than I had asked, so I do appreciate you sticking with me. In terms of, you mentioned Daniel Jones. You're in locker rooms your entire life, but also in the NFL. I mean, you're a veteran. You probably ran the gamut in terms of them bringing in guys who they thought might replace you one day, and you've been or you were released in the morning, but then GM Devin got you traded to New England instead. Yeah. I remember that day. I thought there was a chance you were going to end up here with the Giants that day. But take me inside. Daniel Jones has been through a lot here. Now, nobody is saying feel sorry for Daniel Jones. He got a major contract. He had to replace Eli Manning. We know what that's like. But to go through what he had to go through so publicly while he's coming back from an ACL this winter, take me inside. I don't know necessarily if you can tell me what Daniel was feeling. I don't expect you to do that. But guys in the locker room, when that happens in this league, everyone always just kind of brushes it off. Well, that's part of the business. But is it really part of everybody's business, or is it just one of those things where if you find yourself in that situation, it could tend to be a little bit more daunting, a little bit more challenging than maybe people allow you to know publicly? It's hard.
I remember the years I was in Tennessee and you're the cornerback and you're making money. You'd watch the first round of the draft every year and it's like, oh, all right, they didn't draft my position. Like, we're good. And I was just laughing with my brother yesterday because we were talking about his career, and he never was cut and he never was traded. He got drafted by the Patriots in the first round and he retired as a New England Patriot. That's not the story for a lot of guys. I was cut. I was traded. I was released 10 days before the draft. Like, it doesn't always work out the way you want. And I think when you have a guy and like Daniel Jones, and I can speak from personal experience, I remember taking a visit to the New York Giants. I was going into my last year and got offered by the Giants and got offered by the Miami Dolphins. And Joe Judge was still the head coach there. So I go on my visit and meeting with different guys. I'm meeting with Jerome Henderson in the DB room. And next thing you know, they're like, hey, would you mind hanging around? Daniel Jones just wants to pop in and ask you a few questions. And this guy walks in, and I'm not a big name. Like, it's not like you go across the league and it's like, oh, Jason McCourty's here on a visit. Like, I was at home in New Jersey. I drove into the facility for my visit. There was no private plane or anything like that. And he just wanted to pick my brain on longevity in the league. You're in your 13th year. Just tell me about like the different things you've done for your body, mentally, dealing with the ups and downs of the season, how you continue. He has no reason to do that. He's in there. He's getting his offseason work to walk in and want to ask me questions. And I think the one thing you want to have as like any guy on your entire roster is you want to have a guy, I said earlier, that loves the game and that wants to get better and that's going to put in the work. Now, at the end of the day, if I'm a fan, I'm like, all right, like, you got all the intangibles, you work hard, blah, blah, blah. It's just like, all right, you got to go out there and produce. And I think that's where he's at in his career, where it's just like mentally it is hard sometimes when everybody's talking about these things, and it's hard to enjoy an off season or go on social media or any of those different things if your name's being continued to be brought up. But I was just telling an executive in this league, we were just talking about some of the ups and downs. It was just like, this is a job that we sign up for. Like, this comes with the territory. You want to be an NFL player, then you're going to be talked about. When you have a bad play, people are going to be tweeting at you and all of these different things. So you accept that, you assume that responsibility, and you go out there and you work your butt off because this is a dream that you've had. And I think for him, you want to be the quarterback of the New York Giants is not going to be easy, but you accept all of that and you go out there and you grind.
And then you went and signed with the Dolphins.
I did.
Something they turned you off on? You know, Joe, I had heard this. Were you neighbors with Joe Judge or lived down the street? Or?
Yeah. We were neighbors. Yeah,
because Joe had said that.
Yeah, we were neighbors, and I always had a good relationship with Joe Judge. I just think the way things worked out, especially, and I didn't sign until after the draft and everything. And with the Miami Dolphins, they were asking me to play safety. They had just released Bobby McCain, who ended up playing with the New York Giants, and then they drafted Javon Holland. So it was an opportunity for me to go in there and have a chance to start and then foster in Javon Holland and be able to mentor him. And then actually what we got there in training camp, I was like, I'm going to be passing the torch to him a lot sooner than maybe I want to, because this kid can play some football. Whereas at that point with the New York Giants, I was going to be playing cornerback on a team that already had probably 3 to 4 cornerbacks that they had in place of what they wanted. And I was kind of being a depth piece there to kind of push the younger guys of just more of an insurance piece. So for me, it was just like, well, this is my last year playing. I have a clear path to be able to play. And then also I loved it of the part of mentoring a guy. And it was some familiarity. Obviously, Flores was in Miami, and then Josh Boyer was a defensive coordinator who was my DB coach. And they were familiar with me with J.C. Jackson when I was there, of kind of helping him along and to do the same thing for Javon. So it just made so much football sense to go to Miami. My wife still gives me a hard time because we had a house right there in Jersey and didn't have to move and all of those things. But it worked out. I had, I think, a fun year in Miami. Obviously, getting hurt my last year didn't help. But I think for life after football, there were some really good relationships built there.
And now you came back to Jersey, which is funny. I opened the show talking about, you know, the days of St. Joe's and, you know, the battles with Bergen and Bosco that I covered when I covered high schools. And it's funny because you're from Rockland, you know, but we always fought for you as a Jersey guy. We thought, you know, hey, St. Joe's, he's from Jersey. Come on, he's a Jersey guy. Now you were a full-fledged Jersey guy, living in Bergen County, being here. And now this is kind of where your roots are. I mean, your family's going to be in Jersey. I think it's great. The fact that you're going to be in the booth for CBS with Tiki, one of the best all-time Giants, best running back in franchise history. That's not a knock against Saquon Barkley. It's just what Tiki is and who Tiki is. Are you prepared for all of the Giants talk that you are going to get if they get out of the gate strong this year in that booth with Tiki?
I am. You know, this is such a cool opportunity for me because being an identical twin, me and Dev grew up, and the reason we thought we could actually make it in the NFL, a lot of that had to do with Tiki and Rondé Barber. And we watched them, and even my mom knew who they were because they were identical twins who were both playing in the NFL. And it was just like, well, if they're doing it, there's no reason why we can't strive to do the same thing. We both love this sport. So any identical twins, whether it was Horace and Harvey Grant on the NBA side, we were big basketball fans. Like, you paid attention to other twins that were doing it because it was just something that was really cool. Your chances of making it as a professional athlete are very hard, very slim, but for both of you to do it from the same household, from the same parents, is incredible. So it's such a treat for me to get a chance to get to know him better, to be in the booth alongside him, because whenever I got a chance to play, and Deb said his rookie year, he got a chance to meet Rondé Barber, and he went right up to him after the game and told him how much of a fan he was, because those guys were identical twins. And it comes full circle. My first year in New England, me and Deb were on that team, and we drafted the kid A.J. Moore out of Ole Miss, who was an identical twin. C.J. Moore was his brother, who was still in college his rookie year while we were in New England. And I remember us three having a conversation, and A.J.'s telling me and Deb, like, man, like, we've watched you guys, and the same thing we're doing. A.J. came in the league first. His brother was still in college. He said that was the same story for you guys, and I'm trying to set the tone for him. And we're talking, and we say to him, like, yeah, man, like, I completely understand. It was Tiki and Rondé for us. And they're like, Tiki and Rondé, who's that? I'm like, are you serious? Do you not know who those guys were? And it's just crazy how generations go. And we say it's almost like barbershop talk, where you come along and you're still telling the stories of those that inspired you. So, I mean, it's such a treat for me to get a chance to be in the booth with him.
That's awesome. And as you're talking, it's interesting because, we know between you and Dev, Dev ended up in a place that he's winning Super Bowls early on, and you had a fight in your career, and everything that happened in Cleveland with that was the winless season, wasn't it? Not to bring up bad memories, but you learn from that, and then you end up going to New England and, winning the Super Bowl with your brother. It's funny because you and Tiki are kind of in similar situations. You're both great NFL players throughout a long career, yet your brothers, I mean, his brother's in the Hall of Fame. I think Devin belongs to have consideration once his, eligibility comes up for Canton. As successful as you were, you got to hear it from the other brother that, you don't have the gold jacket when it's Tiki, and you don't have all of these Super Bowl rings. You only have one. It's kind of interesting that maybe you and Tiki kind of share a little bit of that. It's not a, little brother scenario, but it's one of those things where it kind of gets annoying, I would imagine, after a while.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, my 8-year-old son now, he came with me to a Patriots practice last week, and then we go on the cafeteria, and there's a picture of Dev on the wall, and my son's like, oh, there goes Uncle Dev. And he's like, where's your picture? I'm like, I don't really have one anywhere in the building. I might be in an action shot somewhere or whatever. He was like, oh, is that because he's better than you? I guess you can say that. He gives me a hard time about it. So, like, you hear it from all sides. And I think the cool thing for me, especially watching, is Rondé Barber goes into the Hall of Fame, and who's the person that's up there with him unveiling the bus and who's talking about his brother is Tiki. And I think as an identical twin, I can remember playing Pop Warner football, and every coach and every player, they want to see me and Dev go up against each other. You want to see who's stronger, who's faster. You're always pitted against each other because it's like a cool science experiment for everybody watching when you have two people who seem like they're the same person, but you want to know who's better. But when you watch those guys and the way they talk about each other, I'm sure Tiki will tell you, like, I was Rondé's biggest fan. I was probably his biggest critic as well. And that's been the relationship that me and Dev have had. And there were times where we're both playing in the league, and I'm never jealous, but extremely envious of him in the sense where he's going to these Super Bowls and he's having this success. And it's just like, man, I want to see what that feels like. But I can remember he wins his first Super Bowl in Arizona, and I'm down there on the field with him.
I remember that story. Not to interrupt you. I remember that story. Didn't you watch the game from the lobby across the street?
Yeah, we had this thing where, till this day, when we were on opposite teams, we never attended a game of each other's, and when the other one won. So it was just like, it was one of those things where it was just like, I'm going to watch, and I was able to walk over at the end. But being on that field as the confetti fell, like, it was the coolest thing in the world. As you're watching this, my mom, my older brother, and we're watching Deb down there on that football field as a fan of football and watching Super Bowls as a kid, and then watching everything my brother had gone through. I was in Indianapolis with him. I went to the game when they lost the Super Bowl a few years before that, and the feeling he had when he walked out, and he was just like, I'd rather never make it to this game than to get to this game and lose. So to watch him win and the joy that was in his face, like that, it gives me goosebumps talking about it, because it was just cool as hell to watch him go through that. The closest person to me in the world, and you're watching the success he's having. Yeah, there's a part of you that's just like, damn, I want to see what that feels like. And there's another side of you where you're just damn proud of your brother to be able to accomplish that, because he wasn't just in the game. He was a huge part in that franchise being able to get to all of those Super Bowls.
Well, you got that ring, so I think maybe at some point, if Tiki gets too annoying with the Giants stuff, you might want to unpack that Super Bowl ring.
100%. 100%.
Bring it back into the booth and, flash that off. Listen, Jason McCourty, CBS Sports. You'll be in the booth with Andrew Catalan and Tiki Barber. Week 1, is it Houston, Indy? Is that where you're doing?
Yep, Houston, Indy. Yep.
That's going to be crazy. Year 2 for CJ Stroud. I'm sure people are going to love that, and hopefully Anthony Richardson can get back on that field and continue what he started showing. But thank you very much for joining me on the show today. You were great, and have great calls this summer with the Patriots, and I'm sure we will cross paths again at some point this summer.
Anytime. Always good to talk to you, Art.
Thanks, J-Mac. Appreciate it. So for Jason McCourty, I'm Art Stapleton. We appreciate you being all in, and preseason going tonight, and we'll be back next week on All In with Art Stapleton.